Welcome back. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew and Bev.
The Home Secretary has vowed to push the boundaries of international law and stop migrants from illegally entering the UK in a direct challenge to European human rights judges.
Refugees who arrive in the UK by small boat will be, under the government's plans, banned from claiming asylum for life, but critics believe it will be bogged down in legal challenges and there are huge political implications.
So joining us in the studio now for more is GB News' Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood, as well as the former Brexit Secretary David Davis. Good morning, to you both. Let's start with you, Tom. There's a debate about this in the Commons today. What kind of political backlash will we hear?
Well, undoubtedly we're going to hear the line from the Labour Party that has been trotted out for the last couple of days now, that this is unworkable. The Labour Party is being very, very careful to not try and push the boat out, to use a terrible metaphor.
Which is pretty bad, actually.
When it comes to saying that it's wrong to clamp down on illegal migration, obviously the Labour Party is really concerned with winning back a lot of those red wall seats where this is a very high salience issue. So the Labour Party will not be attacking this policy through the means of saying it's wrong to stop illegal migration. They'll be attacking this policy by saying it's unworkable and that it's simply a continuation of the tries that this government has had in the past. For example, the Nationality and Borders Bill, which of course became an act last year and hasn't seemed to stem the flow.
Yeah. What would you expect from today, Andrew?
Well, it'll be a lot of roaring and cheering on the Tory benches because finally they've got some legislation which they can get to grips with. A lot of Tories will support it, but the lawyers on the Tory benches, I suspect, may have some very challenging views on it. And David Davis, of course, the former Brexit Secretary, said, David, look, there's great...
I'm not a lawyer.
You're not, but the great headlines on the front page today. The Daily Mail, biggest crackdown on illegal migration for decades. The government is saying they've found a loophole under European legislation, which means Section 19, 1.b statement, effectively they can bypass the European judges to stop the migrants claiming asylum when they land in Britain. Do you think they can?
Well, what I think will happen is they'll be in court for a long time.
Right.
Look, let me be blunt. There's never been a problem of overruling the European Court if you choose to. You may remember they once instructed us to give prisoners the vote.
You and Jack Straw.
And Jack Straw and I moved a motion in the House of Commons and overruled it.
You did.
And that was it. It was done. And in fact, the European Court then backed off. There was a thing called the Brighton Declaration where they agreed to limit what they did. So that's not the problem. In fact, if you look at the biggest surge last year was the Albanians.
Yeah.
Right? 15,000 Albanians. Why do you think the Albanians came here? Well, if you look around Europe, Sweden, approval for Albanian asylum seekers, 0. You know? Nearly all of Europe, 0. Britain, 55%. We took 55% of people from a safe country. It's got a better international record than we have. I've got a better chance of getting asylum in Tirana than the other way around. It's a safe country. We could have turned down every single one. We didn't. We allowed 55% in. Now, you know, that's where the problem starts. That's why the Albanians came here. You know, so you know. And my view is, of course we've got to fix this problem. Absolutely, of course we have to fix the problem. Put to one side the sort of red wall issue. It's a real, practical and moral problem. People dying in the Channel. But, you know, we've got to do it by common sense approaches. Number one, we should have fixed the Albanian problem. We've started on it, but we could easily have passed a 2-page bill saying...
but why haven't they?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wrote to Rishi in early December last year with 50 MPs behind me. Eventually 100 signed up on it, saying, look, just pass this law and that will at least drop by 1/3 the problem. Because the second problem you have is the Home Office itself can't cope. You know, your viewers, those who are working, will think to themselves, we'll look at the statistic for the clearance rate of the case officers. Case officers now clear 1.4 cases a week. You know, it used to be 30 or 40, you know, 1.4... What are they doing, you know?
Even our immigration lawyer who was here yesterday said you can process an application in half a day.
Yeah.
each person should be able to do it.
Yeah.
Has it slowed down because more people are working from home? Perhaps if you're walking the dog in the morning whilst checking your messages, it's not quite as easy to be as efficient.
There
still
is
a problem.
It's certainly over the course of coronavirus, when a lot of civil servants went to working from home, it did drop dramatically.
Yeah.
So that may well be one component. But you know, the other difficulty is that the Albanians, I think we can solve fairly quickly. The other 2/3 are Afghans. Now, what do you do with somebody who's been an Afghan interpreter for the British Army? If he's caught by the Taliban, will be murdered, and his family will be murdered with him. So he takes a false identity to get out of Afghanistan into Pakistan or Iran, and then pays somebody to get him here. Now, under the new laws, he's going to be automatically rejected for asylum. Yet, in my view, we owe that man a responsibility.
What about the large
and his
number?
family?
What about also, Dave, the large number of people now we detect crossing the channel are from India?
Yeah.
Well, look, there's no war in India. There's no persecution in India. Why are they being allowed?
Well, again, you see, that would be dealt with by the safe country. The point about, just to explain a bit,
Yeah.
when I said we could deal with Albania, if you can declare a country a safe country,
Right.
then you can create a law which allows you to turn around like that. No appeals, nothing. Now, why do I say that? Because Sweden have already done it. Sweden, you know, social democratic, civilised, you know, nice, upright Sweden has done it. And how did they do it? They looked at the international courts, which is why this is all funny in the papers this morning. They looked at the international court case law and designed their law around it. And if we just copied Sweden's law, we could guarantee that the European Court of Human Rights wouldn't interfere, you know. Whether we could guarantee the 51 Refugee Act doesn't interfere, I'm not sure. But you certainly could keep the ECHR out of it, just like that. And with countries like India, absolutely, you could declare them a safe country. They're a democracy. They're you know, they've got flaws, as all of us have, but they're a democracy with the rule of law, and so on. That's not a dangerous country.
Yesterday, David, we were talking about the lack of will, apparently, to stop the people traffickers before they push off from the shore.
Yeah.
Henry Bolton, OBE, he's a regular contributor to this channel, and he said it's frustrating listening to this conversation of why we can't stop the people smugglers. We can and we did. He says we had a programme in place from 2001 to 2006 when Blair pulled the funding. We went hunting these criminals, it worked, and I led part of it. Why aren't we doing that now?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, one of the difficulties is the surveillance of the channel, right? Now, ironically, the European border agency, Frontex, employs a British company from Lincolnshire to surveil the entire Mediterranean. They do a fantastic job. These aircraft with synthetic aperture radars and thermal and great big cameras and so on, can pick up people and groups of mobile phones and so on from 15 miles away, right? And they have been waiting. They've been trying to get a contract with the British government for about a year or longer, you know, and it just goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. You know, there's something wrong inside the Home Office. I mean, do you remember John Reid?
2006, not fit for purpose,
Not fit for
he said.
purpose. I'm afraid it hasn't really improved much. Arguably, it's got worse.
And what about the calibre of the Home Secretaries?
Well, you're drawing me onto dangerous territory here. I mean, the
Is Suella Braverman a great political titan in your
well,
view?
the truth is, let's be clear. The truth is, this is probably the second. Wait, no, probably about it. It is the second most difficult. It may be the most difficult job in politics, but certainly behind Prime Minister, it's the second most difficult. And it does require incredible grasp. And, you know, the arguments we're hearing this morning about ECHR doesn't demonstrate an entirely strong grasp of international law, which is critical. The practicalities of it is critical. I mean, I worry. The thing that worries me most is that we're just picking a fight with the courts rather than solving the problem. That's the real dangerous distinction.
And do you detect also they're trying to pick a fight with the Labour Party?
Oh, of course. Well, I would do that too if I were them. You know, I don't blame them for that. But you know, if the outcome of this is blaming the courts at the end of it, we may feel nice and warm about it, but it doesn't solve the problem. And if it's still in that place come the election, the people that Tom was referring to in the red wall seats and so on won't. I don't think they'll be happy about that. You know, I think we've got. we won't solve this by the next general election, but we've got to make a big dent in it, which is why I wrote to them before Christmas about the Albania issue, because at least that one, there's no moral quandary, at all.
Did you get a reply from the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister said he'll take up the issue, and to be fair to him, they did lean on the Albanian. Well, they talked to the Albanian government, and they've got a sort of better deal, and there has been a bit of a dip, but my view is you can reduce it to zero. Sweden has zero. Most countries in Europe, apart from France and Italy, I think, most countries in Europe have a zero acceptance rate for Albanian refugees. And France, France has many, many more than we do and turns down 90-something% of them. We accept 55. That's where these things start. We create our own problems.
David, I can't have you here without asking for a comment on the Hancock messages, the lockdown files. You were one of the very few MPs who were relatively vocal about being sceptical.
I think I'm on the list of 90 troublemakers, and
you are.
I'm afraid I carried it on.
I was pleased to see there were so many of you, to be honest. Matt Hancock has released a statement, actually, only in the last few moments, saying the message exchange was an entirely partial account. This is in relation to the idea that he put pressure on one of the Berry MPs in North Manchester to say that he wouldn't get the funding for his disability centre unless he voted with Matt Hancock for increased lockdowns or continuing lockdowns. The missing context here is vitally important because this vote was critical for saving lives. This is a spokesperson for Matt Hancock. What's being accused here never happened, demonstrating the story is wrong and showing why such a biased, partial approach to the evidence is a bad mistake driven by those with a vested interest and an axe to grind. What do you make of that statement?
Well, surprise, surprise. I raised a point in the House yesterday. Actually, Matt scuttled out just before I did, because I told him what I was going to say. I raised a point and I said, look, for 3 years, 3 years ago, back in 2020, I was worried that they weren't making decisions on the basis of science. They were making it on the basis of polling, right? Because they spent more in that year than they ever had before on focus groups and polling. And so I asked for the information, right? And I've been spent 3 years, FOIs, written questions and so on. I eventually raised it with the Speaker yesterday because he wasn't releasing the data. And the point is, if you work in a democracy, you release all the data and let the public make the judgment. You can't say, oh, here's this bit and here's this bit. And the government's approach has been to manage and...
Will it have to go to the public inquiry?
Well, what?
The information about the polling.
Oh, yes, of course it will. In fact, as soon as the public inquiry starts taking public evidence, I'm going to go and ask them to, because you see what you saw in I have to tell you, I'm ambivalent about these things because on the one hand I worry about undermining people's confidentiality and so on. On the other hand, I actually think Isabel Oakes has got a point about public interest here. And one of the things you see time and again is Boris's sort of libertarian instincts sort of come out. And then along comes Dominic Cummings and says 75% of the public think you're wrong, or, whatever, and then he collapses again. Now, frankly, I think he should have been stronger. But, that demonstrates that this polling data was much, much more important than really hard science. There was very, very little hard science in the first year. It was guesswork. And, him saying, oh, we're saving lives. Well, I think we're saving lives. Go look at... What I would say to him is go look at Sweden, Matt. Go look at Sweden. They did pretty much the opposite of what you did, and they saved more lives than you did. So I don't think that the premise of that stands up.